Welcome. Take a moment now to breathe deeply and gently let the day slip away. You've done all that was needed. There's nothing more to chase, nothing more to carry, except perhaps a quiet curiosity. Tonight we'll travel together, not far, and yet far enough. We are going back, to the chill-raked fjords of Scandinavia, to the damp black loam beneath fur-lined boots, and to the soft, smoky interiors of low-roofed turf houses. The Viking world, but not the world of sword-waving raiders or roaring halls of gold. Instead, we'll explore a side less often remembered, but far more familiar. Not heroes, but herders. Not glory, but daily grit. This is a journey through struggle, cold, and persistence. Through silent chores and muddy paths, through wind-scraped fields and frozen sea spray. Tonight, we walk with those whose stories were not etched on runestones or sung in halls, but lived in the hushed rhythm of work and worry. So imagine yourself now in a land of snow-brushed mountains, of dark soil clinging to tired hands, of long winters, dim light, and constant labor. Close your eyes, if they aren't already, and let the weight of time settle gently around you. Let us begin. Chapter 1. Smoke and Sleet. Life as a Viking Farmer. Begin with immersive environmental imagery, slowly unfolding the daily rhythm. Imagine yourself waking to the gray half-light of a Scandinavian morning, sometime around the 9th century. The hearth, long since gone cold, lies covered in a faint crust of ash. The air is heavy with the scent of yesterday's smoke, and just beyond the turf-lined walls of your small home, you hear the distant bleat of goats. Outside, the sky is low and colorless, a dull sheet of silver. The cold has crept in during the night, stiffening fingers, stiffening straw. You pull on woolen garments, coarse and scratchy against your skin. They smell faintly of lanolin and old sweat. Not unpleasant, just familiar. The floor beneath you is packed earth, uneven and damp. There's a slickness to it from melted sleet the night before. Every movement in the house feels muffled, like sound itself has been dulled by the cold. Life as a Viking farmer begins early. Not with fanfare or planning, but with repetition. The same chores, the same rituals. The goats must be tended. The small pen, made from rough-cut logs lashed with twisted rope, is just behind the house. The animals are restless, thin, bristled coats already speckled with frost. They nudge your hands, not out of affection, but hunger. You carry a wooden pail to the stone shed. Inside are stores of dried hay and little else. The winter feed is nearly gone, just a few more weeks perhaps. You portion it out carefully, mechanically. The rhythm of their lives is tethered to yours. If they starve, so do you. The goats munch with noisy jaws, and you stand for a moment, your breath clouding. Beyond the pen, your fields stretch. Dark, frozen, skeletal. Stubble pokes through patches of snow. The soil is hard, unyielding. Not long ago it would have been churned by hand, a wooden plow pulled by calloused fingers, or, if you're lucky, a lean, stubborn ox. And so the day unfolds. You chop wood, arms aching with every swing. The logs are cold to the touch, and damp. The iron axe head is not sharp, but it serves. The crack of splitting wood echoes across the still air, and then silence again. There is no glory here, no feast or clash of swords, just the small victories of warmth, of not running out of kindling, of keeping the goats alive, of drying wet wool near the hearth. You return indoors by mid-morning, though the sky has scarcely brightened. Inside the turf house, the light is dim, filtered through a narrow opening near the roof, meant to let out smoke, though it seldom succeeds. You light the fire again, coaxing embers with dry moss and careful breath. It catches slowly, reluctantly. The room gradually fills with warmth, and with it, a thickening haze of smoke. There is no chimney, only the small vent above, which does little. The air grows murky and sour. Your eyes water, but you are used to this. Everyone is. The smoke settles in layers. It clings to the thatch above, turns cobwebs to dark lace, coats the timber frame in a permanent sheen of soot. And still the fire must burn. For heat, for food, for survival. A clay pot, blackened by years of use, simmers with porridge made from barley, a thin, bland gruel. If there's goat milk, it's added. If not, water suffices. You eat in silence. Perhaps you share the bowl with others. Perhaps not. Families were not always large. Illness, injury, childbirth. The reasons were many. Around you, the house is spare. Wooden stools, a low bench, baskets woven from reeds. Everything is handmade, and everything shows the wear of time and need. There is no clutter, no ornaments. What you have is what you can carry, or grow, or trade. Clothing hangs near the fire to dry. Boots lined with straw sit beside the hearth. Above, smoked fish dangles from hooks in the rafters, faintly oily, faintly sour. Not a delicacy, but a necessity. Preserved food means one less empty belly during the long, cold months. Children, if present, do not laugh. Their play is quiet, often shadowed by chores. Fetching water, grinding grain, watching the animals. Childhood is brief and rarely innocent. Life demands their hands early, and outside the sleet returns. Soft at first, then louder, tapping the sod roof with dull insistence. The world shrinks. Just the house, the fire, and the muffled sounds of survival. This is life, not as we imagine it in stories, but as it was lived. Day by day. Quietly, unheroically. Amid the smoke and the sleet. Chapter 2. The ice never melts. Winter in the fjords. The cold came gradually, and then all at once. Imagine yourself at the edge of a fjord, in the deep reaches of what we now call Norway. The days have shortened so much that night and day are almost indistinguishable, both cloaked in the same steely blue. The horizon is a smear of pale light between tall mountain walls, and the ground beneath your feet crackles with frost. Winter in the fjords was not a season to be admired. It was a sentence to be endured. The sea, once a source of fish and connection, is now stiff with floating ice. The boats, drawn up onto shore weeks ago, are dusted with snow, their lines stiff, sails folded like forgotten wings. The wind off the water cuts through even the thickest wool, a needling presence that finds every seam. Inside the farmstead, the world has shrunk. The fields are buried, the tools stored. The people, those who remain, cling close to their fires, to their stored food, and to one another. Outside, the landscape is achingly quiet. Snowfall mutes sound. Even the birds seem to have left. The only signs of life are the lowing of a thin cow, the skitter of a rat in the storage shed, or the slow, crunching footsteps of someone gathering firewood. But the cold is more than a backdrop. It is a force. It makes every task harder. Water drawn from a stream must be carried carefully. Spilling it means waiting for another bucket to thaw. The thin crust of ice on a pail might seem manageable until you must break it again tomorrow. Again and again. A rhythm without music. For the Viking farmer, winter was not measured in days, but in how much food remained. Turnips, dried peas, salted fish, maybe a bit of smoked lamb if the slaughter went well in autumn. The meat is tough, salty, but it keeps. It has to. The hearth burns constantly but poorly. Wood is rationed. Only what was split and dried months ago remains, and much of it has already been used. The flame is weak, often more smoke than heat. Still, the fire must not go out. Relighting it from cold is difficult, and more than that, the fire is the center of everything. Cooking, warmth, light, hope. Outside, the fjords wear a crown of ice. The sheer cliffs drip slowly with icicles like frozen teeth, some so long they seem to anchor the sky to the earth. Snow gathers in deep hollows, turning paths into traps. A step too far for memory, and you find yourself hip-deep in a drift, the cold biting hard against the skin beneath your tunic. And yet, life goes on. Children, if present, are taught to be quiet in winter. Their games are whispered, their play subdued. Too much noise wastes breath. Laughter uses energy better saved. You might see them near the fire carving bone or whittling wood into small toys. A sled, a spoon, a figure of a god or beast. They learn early that silence is not fear, it is survival. There is no visiting neighbors, no travel. The paths are impassable. Even the simplest journey, perhaps just to the next farm across a low hill, can turn deadly in the wrong wind. Frostbite is not named, but it is known. It takes fingers, toes, ears, quietly. The fjord itself lies still as stone. In warmer months, it reflects the sky like glass, rippled by longboats and fish. Now it holds the cold like a secret. The ice creeps out from the shore day by day. Its edge moves slowly, always forward. No one watches it happen, but each day it is closer. The sound of the water has gone. Inside the house, the smell of smoke and old straw hangs in the air. Bedding is never dry. Nothing is ever truly clean. But these are small discomforts. What matters is making it to spring. The elderly grow quieter in winter. They sleep more, they speak less. Some do not wake. There is no weeping, not loudly. Their time was coming, and their place in the cycle is known. Their clothing is not wasted. Their food rationed back into the group. A difficult kindness. And still, the cold deepens. The snow becomes a kind of companion. It changes everything it touches, softening the landscape even as it hardens life. Tracks in the snow tell quiet stories. A fox hunting, a child walking to the latrine, a goat escaping. Stories read without words. And above all, the sky hangs low. Not angry, not dramatic, just heavy. Heavy with time. Heavy with waiting. And yet, in all this stillness, life continues. Quiet, fragile, determined. This was the Viking winter. Not the winter of sagas or battles, but the season that shaped the heart of the Norse spirit. It taught them patience, resilience. It taught them not to fight the world, but to endure it. And it would not end soon. The days, such as they are, become measured only by the dim brightness that filters through the smoke hole above the hearth. There are no clocks, no calendar pages to turn, only the feeling that another day has passed, and that there are still too many left before the thaw. The cold settles into your bones like a second skeleton. You stop noticing it after a while, not because it leaves, but because it becomes part of you. Like the creak of old wood underfoot or the scent of damp wool, it is simply there. As weeks stretch on, the food supplies begin to dwindle. By now, the better stores have already been used. The good salt fish, the fresher grain. Now, you find yourself chewing dried strips of meat that taste more of ash than of animal. Turnips, wrinkled and soft at their cores, are still eaten. Every bite matters. Every piece is cut thin, carefully. Nothing is wasted. Imagine a child asking for more, and there is no more. You say nothing cruel. You simply shake your head and pass them your own bit, if you can. Hunger has no villains in this house, only silence. In the farthest corner of the dwelling, there may be a leather bag strung up from the rafters. Inside, a handful of dried berries, perhaps saved for illness or childbirth, perhaps meant for the very end. Even these are considered each day. To eat them too early is to steal from the future. But to wait too long, well, the dead need nothing. Sometimes your thoughts drift. Not far, just a little beyond the walls. You think of the hill beyond the farmstead, where you stood last summer and looked down at the fjord, green and gleaming in the long sunlight. You remember the goats scattered like white stones, the smell of grass thick in the air. Now that hill is buried in snow. The grass is only a memory. The goats, you're not sure how many will live to see that hill again. And yet, each day still begins. Chores do not stop. The animals still need care. The fire still needs tending. Ice must be broken from the well stone. The chamber pots emptied. The floor brushed of loose hay and ash. These small tasks anchor you. Sometimes the cold brings strange sounds. The timbers of the house pop sharply in the night, as if something invisible presses from outside. The wind whistles through chinks in the turf wall, high and reedy like a distant flute. Snow falling from the roof thuds softly, then is still. But worst of all is the silence between. That vast, unshifting quiet that makes you hear your own breath too loud, your own thoughts too close. Stories are told around the hearth now, not just for entertainment, but to push back the dark. Tales of the gods, of course, Thor's strength, Loki's tricks, Odin's long wandering eye. But more often, people speak of omens, of dreams, of those who wander the hills at night, even in snow too deep for man or beast. You listen, not because you believe, but because it fills the space between heartbeat and shadow. In the back of the room, someone coughs again, a dry, tearing sound. It started days ago. At first it was ignored, then it became a rhythm. Now, it's a presence. Illness comes silently, like a change in weather. A little sweat on the forehead, a looseness in the joints. There are no doctors, only herbal mixtures, simple prayers, and watching. Always watching. Outside, the fjord sleeps under its crust of ice. Here and there, black water still peeks through, a thin channel near the middle where the tide refuses to freeze completely. Sometimes seals are seen there, fat and gleaming, their breath curling into the cold air like steam from another world. But no one hunts them now. The ice is too thin, the hunger too thick, and still you go on. You patch your boots with bits of old leather. You darn your socks with wool pulled from a torn sleeve. You count the remaining logs and note, with dull certainty, that they will not last. But that, too, is part of the rhythm. The snow outside grows heavier, piles higher, paths vanish, the roof sags under its weight. Once a longhouse collapsed in such snow, not far from here. They dug the family out with bare hands. 2 survived. They do not talk much now. And yet, in all of this, there is a strange, low steadiness, a quiet endurance, not hope exactly, but something older, a knowledge that this has all happened before, that the cold does not last forever, that the ice will melt slowly and the fjord will stir. When it does, the river of ice will break apart with sudden cracks like distant thunder, and the first green shoot will push through the black soil, slick with melt. But not yet. For now, the world is wrapped in snow, and life goes on, slow and silent as breath in the cold. This was winter in the fjords, not the thrilling snow-swept scenes of painted tales, but the bitter marrow of existence. It stripped away excess, leaving only what mattered: a fire, a roof, a bowl of warm food, and someone to share it with. Chapter 3. A Hearth Without Comfort. Inside the Viking Longhouse. Imagine now that you are entering a Viking longhouse, not as a guest of honor or warrior returned from distant raids, but as one of the many who lived, worked, and endured within its wooden ribs. Step inside slowly. Your eyes need time to adjust. The door is low, built that way not by accident, but by design, to preserve heat and to force all who enter to bow their heads in humility. You pass beneath the lintel and into the shadows beyond. It is dark in here. The light from outside, already dim in the Scandinavian winter, becomes little more than a fading haze near the doorway. The thick timber walls, chinked with moss and coated in centuries of soot, absorb most light that enters. There are no windows, only slits high in the gables, meant more for smoke than sunlight. And so, within this world of wood and shadow, the fire becomes the center of everything. A long hearth, sunken slightly into the earth, stretches down the middle of the house. Smoke coils upward, uncertain of its path. It sometimes escapes through the roof vent, but more often it curls sideways, clinging to beams, caressing rafters, sinking low until your chest fills with it. The air is thick. Not choking, exactly, but heavy. Warm, with the scent of ash, wool, damp leather, stale breath, and something faintly sour. The cumulative odor of people packed close in a space that rarely opens to the wind. Your feet press into the packed earth floor. It's not smooth. Decades of footsteps have left it uneven, tamped into hollows and ridges. The surface is dusted with fine gray ash from the hearth, bits of straw, and occasionally a forgotten pebble or animal bone. Along the walls, low platforms serve as both beds and benches. They're covered in furs, though not luxuriously. Coarse sheepskin, sometimes deer hide, sometimes woven wool blankets. Soft enough to keep the chill away, rough enough to remind you where you are. The smell of them is strong. Animal oil, old sweat, smoke, but not unpleasant. It is simply part of life. Several families might share this space. Parents, children, grandparents, perhaps a servant, perhaps a foster child sent from a neighboring clan. Privacy is not a concept here. The longhouse breathes as one organism. Every cough, every whisper, every stirring from sleep felt by all. There is talking, but not loud. Voices stay low, half murmured. Too much noise disturbs the illusion of warmth. Too much activity stirs the cold from the corners. The fire crackles softly, fed with precious wood. Each log measured, each branch chosen. Too much fuel, and it burns wastefully. Too little, and the cold seeps up from the floor like a creeping fog. The tools of life surround you. A pot hangs over the hearth on a blackened iron hook, its contents steaming gently. Barley, perhaps, or soup thickened with foraged roots. A pair of iron tongs leans against the hearth's edge. Clay cups, wooden bowls, a chipped knife. Every item is in use. Every item tells a story. Above your head, in the rafters, hang the reserves of survival. Strips of dried fish, skeins of wool, a bundle of birch bark for kindling. These spaces are as sacred as any altar. They represent the future, one meal, one fire at a time. And yet, for all its closeness, the longhouse is not a place of comfort. It is shelter, yes. It is warmth, yes. But comfort, in the sense of peace or ease, is rare. There is always something. Someone stirring in the night, the flicker of firelight playing tricks on the far wall, the scrape of rats in the grain sacks, the distant howling of wind outside. Children sleep curled against parents, against siblings. Their breathing is light, but restless. There are no doors to separate them from adults. No separate rooms. Only the fire, and perhaps a hanging cloth, offers a kind of division. Sometimes there are visitors, a neighbor seeking warmth, a traveler given space on the edge. They sleep close to the doorway, where the wind still sneaks in through cracks in the planks. It is understood. Guests stay near the cold. Family stays near the fire. And as night deepens, the longhouse quiets further. Conversations trail off. Shapes blend into shadow. Only the low murmur of burning wood remains, punctuated by the occasional snore, cough, or shifting body. The cold does not leave, even here. It waits near the walls, behind the benches in the corners. The fire holds it back. Barely. And overhead, the smoke weaves itself into the beams like a second ceiling, a soft veil that thickens the air, coats the lungs, and reminds everyone. Comfort is not given here. It is made, day by day, night by night. The longhouse breathes slowly, like a living thing. Not in sound, but in rhythm. The cycle of firelight and shadow, of waking and sleep, of labor and rest, unfolds here like the quiet turning of the seasons outside. You might awaken in the early hours to the faint sound of stirring. Not sudden, just soft footsteps. The shifting of someone rising to tend the fire. It's always someone's turn. If the flames die, if the embers grow cold, it is not just discomfort that follows, but danger. Cold this deep has a kind of patience. It seeps in, quiet and invisible, and it does not leave. You sit up slowly, furs clinging to your shoulders. The air is thick, unmoving. The smoke from the fire has gathered into a low-hanging layer just above eye level. You breathe shallowly, used to the sting in your throat. No one coughs at it anymore. Not unless illness comes. The coals are red and low. Their glow like the eye of some old beast curled beneath the hearth. Dry kindling is added with care. Birch bark curls and blackens, whispering as it burns. Then the fire catches again, and once more the light dances along the walls. Everything here is built for survival. The benches that serve as beds also store tools and bundles. Beneath one, a skin of water, half frozen. Beneath another, a shallow dish with fish bones. Every inch has a purpose. Even the beams overhead tell a story. Look closely. See the grooves worn into the great timbers from years of hanging tools, ropes, food stores. Some show old scorch marks from a fire that once burned too high. Others are etched faintly with carvings, lines and symbols, maybe names, maybe charms. Things meant to be remembered, or perhaps things meant to be forgotten. And then, the house stirs again. A child shifts beneath a blanket. A dog, lean, sleepy-eyed, rises, sniffs the air, and settles once more by the fire's warmth. Someone pours water into the cooking pot, beginning the day's first meal. It's not breakfast as we know it. There is no clock, no schedule. Only hunger and the habit of tending to it. The longhouse slowly comes alive. Tools are fetched from hooks on the wall. Wooden ladles, simple knives, baskets of grain. Someone grinds barley on a rough stone quern, the scraping sound slow and steady, like a whisper on stone. The rhythm is hypnotic, comforting. This has been done for generations. And outside, though you cannot see it, snow falls again. A soft hush that thickens the roof and hides the world in pale silence. The chores begin. Ash is swept from the hearth, then spread on the floor to absorb dampness. Furs are shaken, briefly hung near the fire to warm. Someone empties the night's chamber pot, outside near the edge of the animal pens, where the snow is trodden dark with old footprints. There is little distinction between inside and outside, between home and work. The line blurs. A Viking longhouse is not a castle, not a fortress. It is a structure of necessity. Its beauty lies in its endurance. And yet there are touches of care. A woven wall hanging, dyed with earth pigments, hangs near the sleeping bench. It shows a simple pattern, perhaps a story from the old gods, or just the looping rhythm of interlocked lines. A child's toy, carved from bone, rests beside a stack of folded linen. A comb made of antler, its teeth worn smooth with use, lies on a shelf. Even in a space ruled by smoke and labor, there is room for small comforts, for craft, for something made with hands and time. And yet, as the day stretches on, the claustrophobia returns. The low ceiling, the constant smoke, the press of bodies. Even in midwinter, some step outside just to breathe, cold as it is. The air outside may bite, but it does not choke. Later, in the dusk, the longhouse returns to stillness. Shadows deepen. The fire glows red again. Meals are eaten quietly. Thin stews, hard bread, a strip of dried meat softened over the flame. No one speaks much. There are no performances, no long tales. Not tonight. And the smoke thickens once more. It clings to your clothes, to your hair, to your lungs. Children wheeze softly in sleep. Elders pull blankets tighter around thin shoulders. Someone whispers a prayer to a forgotten god. Or perhaps they speak only to the fire, asking it to last. You lie back on the furs and stare upward. Above you, in the beams, the smoke dances. It never rests. It never leaves. It is part of the house as much as the wood and stone. This, then, is the Viking hearth. Not a place of comfort, but of continuity. A space where fire and smoke, life and labor blend into one. A place to endure the dark. Together. Chapter 4. No Glory Here. The Truth of Viking Labor. There are no sagas written about the man spreading manure over frozen soil. No songs for the girl cutting rushes by the marsh with numb fingers. Yet without them, the world the warriors fought for would never have existed. Imagine yourself now not as a raider or explorer, but as one of the many who stayed behind, who labored not for gold or fame, but for survival. You rise early, earlier than the light. There is no rooster. The call to wake is the ache in your own body, the kind that settles into the joints and stays there, season after season. Your hands are rough and cracked. Calluses line your palms like leather patches. Beneath your woolen tunic, your skin itches where the cloth rubs raw. But there is no luxury of rest, not even in winter. The animals must be tended, the fields prepared, tools repaired, fences rebuilt where snow or rot has worn them away. Outside, the cold bites hard. The frost does not simply decorate the landscape, it transforms it. The ground becomes iron. The air tastes metallic. Even the wood you carry on your back seems heavier now, sap frozen into hardness. Each step is cautious. The snow hides holes, slick rocks, half-buried tools. To fall is not just painful, it can be fatal. You begin with the animals. Their breath steams in the morning air, little clouds rising from their nostrils as they huddle together in the low enclosure behind the house. The goats are restless. They've gnawed through the last of the stored hay, and now they bleat expectantly, as though asking you to conjure more from thin air. You portion out what's left, carefully. Some straw, a bit of moss, scraps of dried leaves, anything fibrous that will keep their stomachs turning. You run your hand down a goat's side. Its ribs are sharp beneath the skin. You look away. From there, your path leads to the latrine, a trench, half filled with frozen waste, covered in snow. You break the crust of ice, pour in a scoop of ash to dull the smell, and cover it again. Sanitation is not a concept. It is a practice, quiet and necessary. Next, the fence. 2 of the posts have tilted, perhaps a passing elk or just the weight of snow. You brace them with stones, tamp down the soil with your heel. The wind bites your face, finding the seam between your scarf and your skin. It stings, but you press on. Later, with the morning half spent, you walk to the edge of the field. There, beneath a thin layer of snow, the soil waits. Frozen now, yes, but the earth must be turned before the thaw. If you are to plant anything come spring, you work with a short-handled hoe, the blade dull but familiar. You strike, and strike again. The blade rings against buried stone. Your breath clouds with effort. It is not heroic, this work, but it is essential. Children help when they can. The older ones carry bundles of kindling, water skins, baskets. The younger ones follow, imitating your steps. They are learning, not because they are taught in words, but through rhythm, through repetition. A child learns to labor by watching the backs of others as they bend. The tools are simple: wood and stone. Iron, if you're lucky. A spade carved from ash, a rake with teeth worn down to nubs. Repairs are made with rope, sinew, rawhide. Nothing is thrown away. Nothing is wasted. The idea of replacement is foreign. You do not own tools. You tend them, like kin. The hours pass and the sky does not brighten. A pale gray sheet stretches from horizon to horizon. The sun does not shine. It simply lingers behind the clouds like a memory. By midday, your limbs ache, not sharply, but deeply. The kind of ache that becomes part of you. You carry baskets of dung to the field, human, animal, mixed together with straw and ash. It steams faintly in the cold. The smell is sharp, but you do not wrinkle your nose. This is fertility. This is the future. Each handful you scatter is an investment in next season's hope. You pause only briefly to sip cold water from a horn, or to chew a piece of dried bread left from the morning meal. It is tough as bark. Your teeth ache, but it fills your stomach, and that is what matters. The wind picks up in the afternoon, sweeping across the fjord and up the valley. It lifts powdery snow into the air, whirling it into dancing ghosts. You pull your hood tighter and press on. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a raven's call. Harsh, metallic. A sound that echoes across the white fields like a forgotten word. You glance skyward. The bird circles once, then disappears into the pines. And still, you labor. There is no applause, no gold, no firelit songs. Only the steady rhythm of breath, the crunch of boots on frozen soil, the ache of limbs that no longer complain. This is what lay behind every raiding voyage, every longboat's construction, every feast. The hands of the nameless. The laborers in the frost. The ones who held up the world with worn shoulders and bent backs. Their reward? Survival. And that, in this world, was everything. The labor doesn't end when daylight fades. In winter, there's precious little of it anyway. Evening approaches slowly, almost reluctantly, as the sky dims from a dull silver to a cold slate. You squint upward, gauging the time not by a clock, but by instinct. You feel it in the air, the way the wind shifts, the way the goats grow restless. The longhouse, just visible through the skeletal silhouettes of leafless trees, begins to glow faintly from its central hearth. But your work isn't finished. The fields are silent now. No more scraping of tools, no more footsteps over churned soil. Only the low groan of trees under the weight of snow and your own slow breath rising before you in plumes. You pass through the yard again, stepping over slush, mud, and half-frozen straw. The pens need tending once more. Fences reinforced, hooves checked. One goat limps. You kneel in the snow, examining it carefully. A stone bruise, maybe. You rub warmth into its leg. It doesn't resist you. Behind the house, near the compost pit, a heap of soiled straw smolders faintly. Manure, urine, food scraps. Not trash, but fuel for the next growing season. The smell is sharp. The warmth it gives off is real. You pause beside it, hands outstretched. Even this steam from rot and waste, can offer comfort. In the barn, if you are fortunate enough to have one, it is dim and close. Beams creak gently overhead. The animals, goats, perhaps a cow, maybe even a skinny pig, shuffle in their pens, their breath hanging in the cold air like spirits. You speak to them softly, though you know they do not understand the words. The cadence matters more. A murmured rhythm. A kind of lullaby between creature and caretaker. There is always something to be repaired. A latch, a broken yoke, a fraying rope. You tend to these by firelight or candle. Wax made from tallow, the flame small and trembling. You hold a nail between cracked fingers and hammer with care, not force. To miss and waste a nail is not simply a mistake, it is a loss. And then, when the work truly ends, you return inside. The longhouse is thick with warmth, but it's a heavy kind of warmth, saturated with smoke, sweat, breath, and the scent of boiled grain. Your boots leave wet prints on the floor. You strip them off, set them near the fire, and step carefully around the sleeping dog, curled like a comma beside the hearth. You sit, slowly, bones creaking, knees stiff. Someone passes you a bowl. It's the same as yesterday. Barley porridge, perhaps thickened with bone broth or lichen. A strip of dried meat softened in the pot. It's not flavor you crave, but warmth. The steam rises into your face like a blessing. Around you, others eat in silence. A few quiet words. News from a cousin's farm, a broken loom, the fox tracks near the hen house. but mostly it is the sound of spoons scraping wood, of fire popping softly, of breath exhaled in slow satisfaction. The ache in your muscles is deep now. Not pain exactly, just weight, familiar, heavy. You feel it in your shoulders, your spine, your hands, and still, somehow, there is pride in it. No one thanks you. There are no raised cups in your name. But you know the fence will hold against the next storm. The goat will walk better tomorrow. The tools are sharp. The roof didn't leak. The children have eaten. This, too, is legacy. Not etched in stone, but in repetition. You lie down later on your straw bedding. The furs feel damp, always slightly damp. You pull them tight anyway. Beside you, someone breathes in sleep. Beyond the walls, the wind picks up. You hear it dragging snow across the roof, whispering like something old and half forgotten. And then, soft footsteps on the floor. Someone rising for a drink, or perhaps to tend the fire. The rhythm of the house goes on. You close your eyes. Your hands are cracked, stained, lined with earth. Your back is sore, but the fields are ready. The animals fed. The roof did not fall. This is what labor meant in the Viking world. Not glory, not wealth, but survival earned by effort, day by day, hand by hand. And though no skald may ever sing of it, though no rune stones will bear your name, the truth is simple. Without this, the bending, the lifting, the endless toil, there would be no sagas, no kings, no voyages, just snow and silence. Chapter 5. Westbound and Alone. Leif Erikson's Journey. Imagine the sea, gray, rolling, and endless. The air tastes of salt and old ice. The sky overhead is flat and pale, the color of cold steel. And in the midst of it all, a single longship creaks quietly over the waves, its sails straining against the wind. Leif Erikson stands near the prow, one hand resting on the carved snout of the dragon-headed bow. He does not speak. There is little need to. His crew, a mix of hardened sailors and wary farmers, knows their roles. They adjust ropes, bail water, watch the shifting clouds. The journey west had no certainty, no maps, no guarantees of landfall. What Leif had were rumors, spoken in hushed tones by sailors who claimed to have seen forested shores beyond Greenland. His father, Eric the Red, had founded the Greenland settlements after being exiled from Iceland. But Leif looked farther still, past the known, past the safe. The voyage began from Brattahlid, the central settlement in Greenland, the last stop before open ocean. The longhouse he left behind there was sturdy, built from sod and stone, with walls thicker than a man's chest. It stood on a low hill above the fjord, always in sight of the sea. He departed with the blessing of his kin, and the cautious silence of those who doubted the sense of it all. His ship was a gnar, not the long, narrow raiding vessels known for speed and sudden violence, but a broader merchant ship, built for cargo, for endurance, for the slow rhythm of ocean crossings. The crew, fewer than 40, chosen not for boldness, but for steadiness. These were not warriors seeking glory. They were settlers in a way, carriers of seed and iron and hope. The sea was a world of sound, not thunderous, but constant. The creak of timber, the flap of sail, the slap of water on the hull. Day by day, Leif stared westward, his face raw from the cold wind. He did not speak often. His thoughts were his own. Nights on the open ocean were long and deeply dark. There were no stars for guidance on overcast nights. The sail was lowered then, and the ship drifted. Men huddled together beneath cloaks. A single fire, carefully tended in a raised iron brazier, offered light but little warmth. Its glow flickered on the men's faces, carving shadows into their cheeks, making them look older than they were. Leif kept watch even in the small hours. His hand often rested on the tiller, even when others steered. He feared the wind less than he feared stillness. In wind they could move. In calm, they were helpless. And the calm did come. There were days when the sea smoothed out completely, turning to a gray mirror. The sail sagged. The oars came out, broad, heavy, worn from use. The men rowed in silence, their shoulders working in slow rhythm. The sea offered no sound but the dip of blades and the quiet groan of effort. It was during one such calm that they saw ice. Not the soft, broken shards of sea ice, but great, floating shelves of ancient frost, tall as trees. They drifted quietly past them, white and blue and silent. Some cracked and groaned, like distant thunder muffled by snow. The air around them was sharper, cutting into lungs, crystallizing breath. The ship passed between two of these ice giants. All talk ceased. The crew watched the frozen walls on either side, wondering if they might suddenly close in, as if the sea itself could swallow them. Still, Leif said little. He was not a man of many words. His leadership was in action, in the way he lashed down the rigging before the storm hit, in how he woke first each morning, in how he watched the horizon even as others slept. Storms did come eventually. Not wild tempests, but slow-moving giants of wind and sleet. One day, the sky darkened at noon. Rain swept across the deck, driving sideways. The sail had to be taken down quickly. The ship rocked and twisted. Men tied themselves to the rail to keep from being thrown overboard. One was nearly lost. Only a quick hand on a rope kept him aboard. The cold was deeper than before, not merely in temperature but in feeling. The kind of cold that presses into your soul, that whispers you are alone in a vast, uncaring world. And yet, they did not turn back. Leif stood firm at the stern, soaked through, his hair heavy with sea spray. He did not curse the gods, nor call out for help. He simply endured. That was his gift. Days passed, weeks. The food began to thin. Dried fish, hard bread, salted lamb. The barrels of water had to be rationed. When rain came, they caught it in skins and bowls, grateful for each mouthful. No one spoke of failure, but in their hearts they wondered. And then, one morning, a cry went up. Land. Distant, dark, low on the horizon. Trees. They had found it. They had found it. The sight of land stirred something in the men, though not jubilation, not shouting or songs, just a quiet straightening of spines, a tightening of belts, a murmur half believed that the journey had not been in vain. Leif said nothing at first. He only stared, brow furrowed as if he didn't fully trust the shape on the horizon. After so much gray, the green looked almost like a trick of the eye. But the ship held its course. And slowly, as the coastline grew clearer, the truth settled among them like the mist lifting. There were trees, tall and dense, pines, spruces, perhaps birch. Behind them, low hills rolled in from the shoreline, cloaked in mist. The land was unlike Greenland, less stark, less cold, more forgiving in appearance. There were no cliffs of ice, no jagged rock. The coastline curved gently, with beaches of pale sand and marshy inlets. The crew's shoulders began to relax, though none spoke of comfort just yet. Their arrival was not triumph. It was simply the end of one uncertainty and the beginning of another. Leif ordered the sail drawn up and the anchor dropped. They would not rush ashore. Instead, he stood at the bow long into the evening, watching the trees. The land was silent, unmoving, but it watched them, too. He could feel it. The next morning they landed. Their boots sank into cold sand. The forest loomed just beyond, thick and damp, the underbrush tangled and deep. Birds called, strange voices. Not the gulls and kittiwakes they knew, but sharper cries echoing in the canopy. Leif led the way. They moved slowly, hacking a path through the brush. The ground beneath was soft with moss and fallen needles. The air was different here, richer, full of smells they didn't know. Sap, damp bark, unfamiliar flowers. They came upon a clearing and found wild grapes growing in low, tangled vines. It was this, the sagas would later say, that gave the land its name, Vinland. But grapes were not what they needed most. They sought shelter, timber, clean water. Leif selected a knoll near a stream and ordered a camp built. The men set to work with dull axes and tired hands, felling trees, raising simple shelters. Smoke soon curled into the sky, but there was no celebration. Leif stayed apart from the others as they built. He walked the perimeter of the clearing each evening, hand on his axe. There was no sign of people, but no certainty of absence either, and the land, beautiful though it was, did not welcome them. It tolerated. The weather shifted quickly. Rain swept through for 2 days, soaking everything, turning the ground to slick mud. Fires struggled to stay lit. The crew's clothing, never fully dry, began to rot at the seams. The wood of their tools swelled with moisture. Food supplies thinned faster than expected. Hunting was difficult. The woods were too quiet. Tracks were rare, the animals skittish. A few deer were seen, lean and fast. Snares were set, but few were caught. And then one morning, Leif found footprints near the edge of the camp. Not theirs, smaller, bare, pressed deep into wet earth. He didn't speak of it at first, but the others noticed his change in mood. He kept his axe in hand, even by the fire. He took the first watch each night, and still the wind moved through the trees with soft sighs, as if carrying secrets from far inland. The men began to whisper, of spirits, of old gods displeased, of people unseen. Leif said nothing, but he began walking farther each day, deeper into the trees, always alone. He searched for signs, not of conquest, but of meaning, of where they were, of whether they were meant to stay. He came back one evening with his boots soaked and his hands empty. "No village," he said, "but we are not the first here." They stayed a few more weeks, built more shelter, cut more wood, but no roots took hold. Leif knew it. The others began to ask, quietly, if it was time to return. And one morning, he agreed. They left behind the simple huts, the carved timber beams, the stone hearths built with effort and frost-bitten fingers. They left it all for the forest to reclaim. The ship, repaired with timber from the New World, creaked as it was launched again. The sail caught the wind. They turned east, back toward Greenland, back toward the known, and behind them, the coastline of Vinland faded into mist. Unwelcoming, untouched. Leif did not weep. He did not sigh. He simply stood at the prow, facing home, his face as unreadable as the ocean itself. Chapter 6. Cold Shores and Empty Camps. Life in Vinland. The land seemed generous at first, forests thick with trees for building, rivers full of clear, rushing water, the vines, the fish, the untouched soil. All of it suggested abundance. But the truth of Vinland was different. The camp, small and roughly built, stood like a splinter in the wilderness. Raised by Leif's crew and left behind when they returned home, it was later occupied again, by others driven by the same hope for something more. They came after Leif, emboldened by tales of his voyage. Not raiders, but settlers. Men and women. Families. People who had endured Greenland's stone-hard soil and bitter winds and believed they might find something gentler here. And when they landed, they found the silence. No people greeted them. No paths led inland. No stone markers or huts or signs of trade. Just trees. Endless trees, dark and swaying in a wind that carried no birdsong. Their footsteps were the only sound, echoing faintly in the vastness of it. They repaired the old huts first. Moss had grown over the timber. Rain had warped the beams. Fires were rebuilt in stone hearths and tools unpacked. They worked quickly, not frantically, but with the steadiness of people who have built with cold hands before. For a time, life held. Water came easily from the stream. The fish, Fat, cold-water trout bit readily. The forest offered game, though it moved cautiously. Snares caught rabbits. A deer was felled with a lucky spear. There were even days when laughter crept into the camp, cautious and short-lived. But then the trouble began, not with a scream or a sword, but with distance. Those who wandered too far did not return promptly. A young man sent to scout the coast returned late and pale. He had seen smoke inland, a column rising between trees. But he had seen no people, just the smoke. When he called out, no voice replied. They set sentries then. Every night, 2 people remained awake while the others slept. They watched the tree line. They listened. But the trees gave no answers. Then, one morning, they found a spear. Not theirs. It was lodged upright in the earth at the edge of the clearing, carved from dark wood, stone-tipped, wrapped in sinew. No message, no blood. Just the spear, standing like a warning. They did not touch it. For days they left it where it was. Even when storms came, the spear remained upright, unmoved by wind or time. Then, one night, a dog barked. Once. Then silence. When they checked the pens the next morning, 2 goats were missing. The fence unbroken. No tracks. That was when the fear began to take root. Not panic, not terror, but the slow, steady kind, the kind that sours food in the stomach and keeps the hands on weapons long after dark. Still, they did not flee. There was too much at stake. Too much effort behind every plank, every fire, every field cleared. But the forest changed. The trees felt closer. The wind carried sounds that didn't fit. Cracks, whistles, sighs. One woman said she saw eyes in the trees. High, too high for a man. Her husband told her it was a trick of light, but she would not leave the hut after dusk again. Still, they endured. They planted barley. They dug trenches for drainage. They carved long planks from pine, hoping to build more shelters come spring. But their voices grew quieter, their circle tighter. Even laughter, when it came, sounded strained, like a song remembered without joy. Then came the arrows. Not in volleys, not in violence, just one. At dawn, lodged in the door of the sleeping hut. No injury, no sound of approach. The shaft was smooth, fletched with white feathers. Leaders gathered by the fire that evening. No shouting, no speeches, just quiet deliberation. They had weapons, axes, knives, hunting bows, but few numbers, and fewer answers. And still, the trees watched. When they finally decided to leave, it was not with haste, no running, no fear on the surface, just a slow packing of bundles, a quiet dismantling of huts, a final dousing of the fire, its smoke rising straight into the gray sky as if asking forgiveness. They left the spear where it stood. The ship rocked gently in the bay as they rowed away, oars creaking, the water dark and cold beneath them. No one looked back. The shoreline remained still. The trees offered no farewell. Finland had been touched, but not taken. And in time, grass would grow over the fire pits. Moss would reclaim the beams. The hearthstones would sink quietly into the earth, as if they had never been there at all. They left no monuments, no walls of stone, no towers, no carved runes. Only the faintest impressions in the earth where posts once stood, and the slow decay of timber soaked with coastal rain. In time, even those would disappear. The second attempt at settlement in Vinland had lasted only 1 season, a handful of months. Not long enough to take root, just long enough to know the truth. The land was not empty, and it would not be claimed without cost. What was left behind was more than just wood and ash. It was a memory, a mark in the Viking soul that westward was not always better, that not all frontiers yielded to axe and fire. Years later, a third group tried again. They came fewer in number, cautious. Their ship was smaller, their supplies fewer. They did not settle the same spot. They found a new inlet further north, land flatter, trees sparser, a stream nearby. They built one shelter, not several. No clearing, just one structure tucked into the trees like a secret. They stayed for weeks, maybe longer. We don't know their names. We don't know how many they were, but we know what they left. Because much later, hundreds of years later, fragments were found in the soil. A cloak pin, a stone oil lamp, a fire pit, charred bones from animals not native to the region, and iron nails, straight, northern, unmistakably Norse, signs of a people trying, quietly, to hold on. Yet, even here, silence prevailed. The forest slowly returned. The trees leaned inward. The soil swallowed the hearthstones. The sea air rusted the iron. And the names of those settlers, if they were ever spoken, were lost to wind and moss. There is a sadness to this history, but not tragedy. These settlers did not fail from foolishness. They were not chased away by monsters. They were simply outmatched by silence, outnumbered by trees, outpaced by a land that offered no welcome, no warmth, no recognition of their effort. Imagine them, then, in those last days. The sky dim with approaching winter. The ship tied in the bay, loaded again with what little remained. Their hands blistered, their feet calloused, their backs aching from splitting logs and turning unfamiliar soil. They bored in silence. Not with bitterness, but resignation. Not all land can be tamed. Not all voyages lead to settlement. Some are meant only to be survived. And so they turn homeward, again. Back across the wide gray ocean. Back through wind and ice. Back toward the crooked coastline of Greenland, with its steep cliffs and smoke-thin hearth fires. Back to longhouses thick with smoke and chores that repeat through the generations. Back to a world they understand. They leave behind the sound of the sea and foreign inlets, the footprints erased by moss, the half-built dreams swallowed by silence. The name Vinland lives on, but only in story, a whispered memory of possibility. The land beyond the horizon, the place where grapes grow and trees stand tall. The place almost claimed, but never kept. And today, if you stand on those northern shores, where wind still rattles the trees and the ocean sighs against the rock, you will find no ruins. No signs of conquest, only the quietest echoes. Perhaps a stone, blackened by fire, a nail twisted by rust, a whisper in the reeds. This, too, was Viking life. Not all axes and raids, but the long, lonely effort to make something last, even when the land says no. Chapter 7. Secrets Beneath the Mound. The Oseberg Burial Ship. The earth hides things. It always has. Sometimes it swallows them whole, timber, cloth, bone. Sometimes it preserves them, not as artifacts, but as whispers of lives that once moved, breathed, and believed. In 1904, near a low hill in Vestfold, Norway, farmers digging through a mound uncovered such a whisper, though what they found was no small object. It was a ship, buried long before their great-grandparents were born, wrapped in soil, sleeping. The Oseberg ship, as it would be called, had not sailed for centuries. It was not wrecked or abandoned. It was placed, intentionally, carefully, a vessel not for the sea, but for the afterlife. Imagine the mound before it was touched. A rise in the land, subtle, grassy. A place that sheep may have grazed without thought. Inside, untouched by sunlight for over 1,000 years, the ship rested on clay. Above it, soil had settled, pressed gently down, sealing it off from time. Once excavated, what emerged was astonishing. The ship, 71 feet long, had been exquisitely built. Oak planks riveted with iron nails, its hull shallow and elegant, designed not for ocean waves, but for coastal gliding, for ceremony. The prow rose in a sweeping curve, its surface intricately carved with interlocking spirals, snakes, and beasts that seemed to coil and slither in stillness. But the ship was not empty. Laid within it, amid remnants of cloth and bone, were two women. Their bodies long decayed, their identities unknown even now. Yet everything around them told of importance, reverence, power. One had been older, likely in her 70s based on bone analysis, the other younger, perhaps in her 40s or 50s. Whether they were related, mother and daughter, teacher and student, noblewoman and servant, is not known. What is clear is that both were honored. The burial was not hurried. It was a ceremony of great care. The ship itself had been pulled inland from the fjord, hauled, likely by many hands and ropes, to the place chosen for the mound. Around it, pits were dug for offerings, animals, tools, food, everything the dead might need in the next world. Inside, elaborate gifts were arranged. There were finely woven tapestries, their patterns faded but still legible. Sleds, practical and ceremonial, each carved with intricate shapes, beds with frame posts as ornate as any chieftain's hall, wooden chests, buckets, even kitchen tools. Imagine the day of burial. The ship pulled across damp earth, the mourners walking in slow procession, the sound of footsteps on moss, the crackle of torches, the low murmur of prayers, or perhaps songs now lost. The bodies, prepared with care, dressed in woven wool, pinned with bronze brooches, hair combed, skin washed, then laid in beds aboard the ship, not side by side, but near each other, as though watching over the voyage ahead. And then, day by day, the ship was covered, layered with soil, clay, turf, until the prow was gone from sight and the mound took shape, until what once danced on the sea now slept in the earth. It was not a place of fear. This was reverence. The mound was not meant to hide, but to honor, a mark in the landscape, saying, "Someone of great meaning passed this way," not by sword, not by raid, but by wisdom, ritual, or mystery. When archaeologists opened the burial in the early 20th century, much had already decayed. The mound had been disturbed centuries earlier, and grave robbers had likely taken anything of gold or easy value. But they left the story behind. Wooden carvings, fragments of fine textiles, bones of sacrificed animals, horses, oxen, dogs, parts of carts and wagons, small tools gently worn, a glimpse into a life not recorded in saga or battle, but in the quiet poetry of preparation. And the ship itself, so well crafted it seemed almost ready to sail again. Today, the Oseberg ship rests in a museum, preserved under dim light, its prow arching upward like a frozen wave. Tourists pass around it in hushed tones, their footsteps echoing on stone floors. But close your eyes, and you can still feel it. The rhythm of hands laying turf, the flicker of torchlight on carved wood, the silence of the ship waiting as the last clod of earth falls. A story buried, never forgotten. They buried her with a sled. Not for winter travel, not for hauling firewood across snowbound fields, but for a journey they believed would reach far beyond land and sea. The sled itself, found within the Oseberg ship, was not merely functional. It was art. Its curved runners, its panels were carved with scenes, animals twisted in spirals, beasts with open jaws, patterns that echoed the old stories. And yet, for all their beauty, these objects were not for the living. They were offerings, carefully chosen, ritually placed, meant to accompany the dead into whatever realm lay beyond. Among the burial items, archaeologists found 4 intricately built sleighs, 5 carved animal head posts, a loom, and dozens of household tools, buckets, spindles, ladles, and even a wooden chest with an iron lock. These were not trophies, not tokens of conquest. They were implements of life, now placed in the stillness of death. And woven into this quiet array, one object stood apart, a tapestry. Only fragments remained, fragile as breath, but enough to glimpse its purpose. Figures stitched in fine thread, A procession, perhaps, or a ceremony. Human shapes, arms raised, animals beside them. A tree or a gallows. Some scholars believe it may have depicted a ritual, perhaps a funeral rite, perhaps a myth. What is striking is not its clarity, but its intent. This was not the burial of a warrior slain in battle, nor a king laid low by age. This was something else. A death marked by ritual, thought, symbol, care. The two women buried in the ship may have held spiritual roles. Some have speculated one was a vulva, a seeress, a woman of arcane knowledge, feared and revered. The sagas describe such women as clad in blue robes, bearing staffs of iron, speaking in trance, their voices echoing with prophecy. No such staff was found here. But the richness of the burial and the nature of the objects suggest something more than simple nobility. Perhaps she healed. Perhaps she led ceremonies. Perhaps she walked between the seen and the unseen. And the younger woman, companion, successor, daughter, or simply the one chosen to follow. The grave goods speak softly, but with purpose. Each item placed was a message. She was needed. She will be needed still. And yet, for all the care taken, the passage of time did its work. When the mound was first disturbed, likely by grave robbers centuries before, much of the treasure was removed. Gold, silver, even bones were displaced. The human remains, when rediscovered in 1904, were incomplete. Skulls had been removed, some bones scattered, and so, even as the mound gave up its secrets, it kept its silence. We do not know the names of the women. No runestone tells their story. No saga remembers their lineage, but the shape of their burial tells us something deeper. They mattered. Enough to haul a ship across land. Enough to carve beauty into every surface. Enough to offer horses, 16 of them, led to the grave and laid down beside their mistresses, heads turned inward. Enough to sing, perhaps, as the last turf was placed. These were not burials of grief alone. They were ceremonies of passage, a belief that the dead would go on, not as shadows, but as presences, in the land, in the sky, in the story of the people, and in this ship, shaped by hands now long turned to dust, that belief still floats. It does not sail, but it endures. So when you see the Oseberg ship today, under quiet museum lights, among the glass cases and softly padded floors, remember, this was once the center of a ritual, the heart of a farewell. And beneath that long-forgotten mound, where grass once grew tall and the wind moved unbothered, the ship waited for 1,000 years, not to be discovered, but to be remembered. Chapter 8. When Women Ruled the Dead. Norse burial rituals begins as a gentle continuation, guiding us deeper into the sacred and practical hands that shaped Viking funerals. The dead did not bury themselves. Behind every ship burial, every mound, every flame-lit pyre, there were hands, deliberate, practiced, often female. In Norse society, it was women who bore much of the responsibility for death's rituals, not simply as mourners, but as guides, as preparers, as keepers of the rites. Death, to the Vikings, was not an ending. It was a crossing to another realm, be it Valhalla for the chosen, Helheim for the rest, or any of the quieter places where spirits lingered like mist on the hills. And to cross that threshold properly, the dead needed more than rest. They needed preparation. The Volva, the seeress, sometimes presided over this journey. Cloaked in blue, adorned with beads and brooches, she might chant or speak with the dead, or speak for them. But she was not always present. In most burials, it was the women of the household, mothers, daughters, wives, who took the lead. They washed the body, not hurriedly, not as a chore, but with reverence. Cold water from the stream or heated in clay pots, linen cloths, roughly spun but clean. Hands moved over the cooling flesh not to cleanse away life, but to prepare it for elsewhere. Fingernails were trimmed, hair combed with antler-tooth combs. Wounds were bound when present, not to heal, but to show dignity. The dead were dressed, not in rags, but in their best. A wool tunic, carefully woven, a cloak fastened with brooches, iron, bronze, silver, or gold, depending on status. Sometimes a belt, a pouch with useful items, a flint, a knife, a small token. For women, perhaps keys, symbolic of the home, the hearth, the life they had tended. And then, the laying out. This could be simple. A grave dug into soft soil, lined with stone. Or more elaborate, a boat hauled up from the shore, nestled into the earth, like the Oseberg burial. In some cases, the body was placed on a raised platform for a time, a chance for the soul to linger, to listen to mourning, to hear its name spoken one last time. Offerings were chosen with care. Food, bread, dried fish, perhaps meat, not as luxury, but as fuel. A horn of mead, a carved bowl, objects that had meaning to the departed. A warrior might receive his sword, a weaver her spindle, a trader a scale and weights, sometimes animals, a dog, a horse, a goat. These were not given casually. They were companions, symbols, sometimes sacrifices. The act was not cruelty. It was belief that these animals would serve again, across the veil. And in many cases, especially among the noble or powerful, the grave itself was a message. Mounds were raised deliberately, shaped to last. A beacon on the landscape, visible for miles. A way of saying, here lies someone worth remembering. But even the simplest graves held meaning. A child, buried with a carved wooden toy. A fisherman, laid to rest with his net, now stiff with age. A mother with a single iron key placed beside her hand. These rituals were not uniform. They varied by region, by wealth, by time. Some were cremated, their ashes placed in urns or scattered at sea. Others buried whole, undisturbed. But the care behind them endured. And it was women, quiet, unseen in the sagas, who made these rituals real. Their hands combed hair, tied shrouds, lit the pyres. Their voices sang the farewell songs. Their memory kept the names of the dead long after others forgot. In the Norse worldview, death was not clean. Ghosts walked, spirits lingered. Improper burial could lead to a draugr, a restless corpse, hungry for revenge or bound by unfinished business. And so, rites mattered. Each gesture was protection, for the living as much as for the dead. They salted the thresholds, they whispered charms, they watched the smoke rise and knew what it meant. And when the earth was closed over the grave, when the last stone was placed or the last turf pressed down, they did not turn away with weeping. They stood a while longer, not in fear, but in respect, because death in this world did not come alone. Some burials burned. The Norse cremation rites were vivid, not in violence, but in spectacle. The flames that consumed a body did not merely destroy, they transformed. Fire, after all, was seen not only as an end, but as a purifier, a way to carry the soul upward. Picture it. A pyre built high, logs stacked in a square, oiled or tarred, layered with dry brush. Atop it, the body, wrapped in cloth or laid bare, perhaps armored, perhaps adorned with tokens. Around the base, offerings. Beside it, mourners, the air sharp with resin and salt, the smell of pine sap and burning wool. At the appointed time, a torch was brought. Who lit it varied. Sometimes the eldest son, sometimes a priestess, sometimes a figure in silence, masked. The fire began slowly, then rose, licking up through layers of dried wood, catching on cloth, devouring in sequence, boots, tunic, beard, hair. They did not watch idly. They watched as a rite. This was the soul's release. Smoke curled into the sky. not in great plumes, but in long fingers. The body blackened, split, turned to flame and ember. Sparks drifted upward, twisting like spirits. Sometimes people whispered to them. Sometimes they sang. And when the flames finally ebbed, hours later, what remained was ash, white and gray, scattered with charred bone. These were gathered, not discarded. Women often led this too, their hands steady, reverent. The bones were washed with water and herbs, then placed in an urn or wrapped in cloth and set within a stone cairn. Sometimes the remains were carried to sea and lowered beneath the waves, sometimes buried beneath a mound, like seeds planted deep in the soil. These were not quiet events. They were communal, a moment where life paused to acknowledge its end, and the crossing into something unseen. But not all deaths were honored so. Some received no burial at all. Those who died in exile, in disgrace, in battle where their bodies could not be recovered. Those considered dangerous, cursed, or tainted. The unburied, after Ganga, were feared. Spirits who might walk again, who might pull the living into dreams, who might disturb the house or curdle milk or bring fever. To prevent this, charms were whispered over graves, twigs bound in 3, iron placed near the mouth, stones laid on the chest to keep it from rising. Superstition, perhaps, or memory of those who did not rest. Still, most were buried with care, because memory was sacred. Long after a burial, it was women who tended the site, who brought offerings, who spoke the name aloud. Not every day, but often enough that the grave never vanished from the mind. Some placed flowers, others food, a small wooden carving, a cloth ribbon. They came in silence, but not in fear. To remember was not painful. It was necessary. A Viking's soul, they believed, passed to another world, but their name lived on only so long as it was spoken. And so, even in the years after the burial, long after the pyre cooled or the mound grew over with moss, someone remembered. The firelight on their face, the sound of their axe in the morning, the way they laughed, or the way they fell silent just before speaking something wise. These rituals, half religion, half tradition, were not for kings alone. They were for all. Warrior and weaver, farmer and fisherman, infant and elder, each with a place in the long, invisible web of ancestry. And it was women who kept that web from unraveling. Their hands built no longships, but they built the afterlife. With song, with stone, with memory. They ruled not through sword or law, but through continuity. Not queens of halls, but of hearths, of graves, of the quiet spaces between breath and eternity. Chapter 9. Mead, Blood, and Power. Inside the Jarl's long hall step inside the long hall of a Jarl. Not the smoke-dim, low-roofed house of a common farmer, but something grander, taller, wider, its roof arching like the hull of a ship turned skyward, its doors thick with iron fittings. The floor, still earthen but carefully swept, covered in rushes or straw, sometimes even rugs brought from far-off markets. This was no place of quiet survival. It was a place of performance. The air is thick with heat and the scent of roasted meat. Grease crackles on open fires, spitting as slabs of pork and venison turn on spits. The hearth is not just functional. It is central, wide, bright, alive. Light dances on the carved beams overhead, where shapes of dragons, wolves, and entwined knots coil in permanent motion. Benches line the sides of the hall, covered in fur. Men of rank sit shoulder to shoulder, their cloaks spread wide, their boots muddy with the day's march. Between them are horns of mead, golden, thick, heavy with honey and fermented grain. Drunk slowly, but not always wisely. At the far end of the hall, slightly elevated, sits the Jarl. He is not a king, but he is close. Perhaps his beard is streaked with gray. Perhaps his hands are soft from years of command, or calloused from battles still whispered about. Rings circle his fingers. Silver, maybe gold. A sword lies across his lap, sheathed, but not far from his hand. He watches everything, every gesture, every pause in a sentence. His wife sits beside him, dressed in woven wool dyed deep blue. She says little, but when she does, the room quiets. Her jewelry speaks louder, strings of beads, brooches shaped like animals, a cloak clasped with silver shaped like the moon. Her presence here is not decoration, it is political, calculated. The feast is not just for celebration, it is for negotiation, alliances, tribute, warnings cloaked in compliments. A visiting chieftain drinks from the Jarl's own horn, a gesture of trust or test. If he hesitates, it means suspicion. If he drinks too deeply, arrogance. There's a balance to be struck in every gesture. The hall is loud, yes, but layered. Beneath the songs and laughter, beneath the clatter of bowls and the calls for more ale, there are quiet conversations, short glances, hands resting a little too long near knife hilts. Everyone here wears a face. The skald, seated on a lower bench, tunes his harp. He sings between courses, not always of heroes, sometimes of omens or riddles or half-remembered tragedies. His words are chosen carefully. Too much praise offends modesty. Too little invites insult. And, in the shadowed corners of the hall, servants move quickly. Women, boys, older men. They refill horns, replace trenchers, mop up spilled mead. They speak little, but they hear everything. Later in the night, after the first round of food has vanished, and the heat from the fires has made cheeks flush and eyes glassy, the talk becomes bolder. A warrior brags about a raid, how many he killed, what treasure he carried home. Others laugh, but watch the Jarl for reaction. A wrong boast can be dangerous. A right one might earn reward. Sometimes poison is spoken of in jest, but only in jest. Mostly. There are stories, true, nearly true, and entirely false. A man claims to have seen Odin in a storm. Another swears his brother married a giantess in the mountains. A third remembers a blood feud settled by the death of 3 uncles and 1 lucky boar. But these are not just stories. They are currency, status, proof that you belong in this room. Women of the court walk between benches, offering bread, meat, sometimes a glance too long. Flirtation here is as much about position as desire. Who you speak to, who you avoid, who you toast, all of it noticed. And the Jarl notices most of all. He drinks, yes, but less than the others. He listens. He laughs when expected. Frowns only slightly at the wrong moment. When a minor landowner begins to boast too loudly, the Jarl's voice, calm, cool, reminds the hall whose roof they sit under. The laughter quiets. The point is made. And still, the fires burn. The dogs, curled near the wall, stretch, stir, then sleep again. Outside, the night howls through the trees. The guards at the door shift their weight, spears in hand, ears trained not on the wind, but on the feast inside. Because power is fragile, even here, even under a roof carved with dragons. The second course is served. Not just food, an assertion. A reminder of wealth, control, reach. The roasted meat is richer now. Game hunted in the Jarl's forest, boiled blood sausages, dense bread glazed with fat, small apples wrinkled from storage, sliced and served with goat cheese. Salted fish, sharp with brine, brought inland from the fjords in sealed barrels. Everything means something. What is served? How much? To whom? A man seated near the center receives his second helping before the others. A signal. He's in favor. Someone further down the bench, quiet all evening, goes unnoticed by the serving hands. A message. One understood without words. You must listen closely now. The noise of the hall has changed. The laughter is slower, the words heavier. Men speak with broader gestures, lean too close, slur slightly. Mead flows easily, but intentions do not. They sharpen. At the Jarl's high seat, the conversation is careful. He does not need to shout to be heard. He leans forward and others lean in. His eyes scan the room constantly, even as he speaks. A quiet word to a trusted man. A brief glance to the skald. A moment's silence that says more than a threat. This is not a space ruled by swords. It is ruled by proximity, memory, leverage. To insult the Jarl here would not bring immediate punishment. It would bring something worse: exclusion, isolation. Later, after the feast ends and the fire burns down to red coals, a visitor might find himself invited to stay. Or not, and those not invited rarely return to the hall. There are stories, rarely spoken aloud, of poison passed in a cup, of meat carved from a wrong haunch, of a hunting accident the next day. The hall is loud, yes, but beneath it runs a river of unspoken law. And women watch it all. The Jarl's wife remains silent, her gaze level. But she speaks with a nod, with a withheld smile, with who she chooses to toast. Her attendants observe every guest, who is drunk, who pretends to be, who drinks too little, who never finishes his meat. One girl, not yet 20, fills the cups with a steady hand, her braids tight, her eyes lowered. But she hears the rhythms. She learns the stories. One day, perhaps, she will marry well. Or not. That may depend on what she remembers from nights like this. And the skald sings again, this time not of gods or dragons. He sings of a man betrayed, a brother poisoned, a feast turned fatal. The song is beautiful, sad. The firelight flickers across faces as listeners wonder, who is the song truly about? This is not entertainment, it is a warning. Later, toward midnight, someone speaks too boldly. A land dispute, a half-forgotten insult. Voices rise, a hand slaps the table. Then silence. All eyes turn to the Jarl. He says nothing. He does not need to. The moment lingers, then passes. The man who shouted stares into his mead. The one beside him murmurs something about old wounds and forgiveness. Someone begins a drinking song, loud and off-key, and the hall breathes again. The Jarl leans back, fingers tapping once on the hilt of his knife. Not a threat, just presence. The song rises, feet stamp on the floor, horns clink, and still the walls of the long hall remember. Every word, every name, every pause in laughter. The wood holds it quietly. The beams, darkened with smoke and time, echo with the long rhythm of power. Here, strength is not shown. It is felt. In the silence after a laugh. In the eyes that meet too directly. In the weight of a mead horn just slightly too full. As the fires dim and the guests stagger to their furs, the hall quiets, but never fully. Someone is always watching. Someone always listens. And even the strongest warriors sleep with a blade tucked close, just in case the night remembers something the day forgot. Chapter 10. Feasting to Forget. Coping with Fear in Nobility. The Jarl laughs, but it's not joy that fuels it. It's habit, expectation, the long-practiced sound of a man who must always seem in control, who must never show his worry, not to his men, not to his wife, not even to the gods. But fear lives in the long hall. Not open, not wild. It creeps. It coils beneath the skins draped on benches, behind the carved beams overhead. It flickers at the edges of the firelight. The Jarl has enemies. Some known. Old rivals, nearby landowners who recall insults from a decade ago. Others suspected. Those who smile too easily at the feast, drink too little, speak too carefully. And there are the unseen enemies. The ones spoken of in low voices around the hearth at night. Odin, the all-seeing. Loki, the ever-turning. The dead who were not buried right. The ancestors displeased. Nobility did not grant immunity to fear. It made fear more complicated. The hall is large, yes. Its roof does not leak. Its food stores are deep. But power must be protected. Endlessly. Tirelessly. The Jarl's sword is sharp, but he cannot wield it against whispers. So he drinks. Not to celebrate, to steady the edge. Each cup of mead dulls the questions. Each toast, each skald's song, each clang of horn is a shield against the darker thoughts, against the storm clouds building in his mind. He remembers the night a traitor brought news, another Jarl, far to the north, poisoned at his own feast. The mead cup passed too quickly, the server too quiet, the taste just slightly wrong. By the time the torches guttered low, the man was coughing blood into the rushes. And now, each time a cup is handed to him, the Jarl watches the server's eyes. Not for guilt, for intention. His wife notices. She too is cautious. Her dress is finer than most, her brooches heavy. But her glance always scans the room, measuring mood, noting absences, remembering who spoke last with whom. She smiles rarely, and only when she means to. She worries for her sons. They play outside the hall, sparring with wooden swords, practicing their balance on the frost-slick stones. They laugh, but she knows how easily laughter dies. A twisted ankle, a fall near the fjord, an angry rival with nothing to lose. And so, each night she watches the fire burn low, and counts how many bowls of stew are scraped clean, and how many men stagger to sleep, and who does not. Outside, the wind moves through the timbers. It whistles at the eaves, presses against the thick turf roof, slips under the doors like a long breath. Sometimes it sounds like a voice. Sometimes like many. They say the gods walk at night, that Odin moves with one eye open, seeking the fated, that spirits of the old world wander the hills, visiting those who forget to offer. So the Jarl offers. Goat blood, poured in the snow. A carved token buried in the ash near the door. Words murmured over his food before the first bite. Not loudly, not with ceremony, just in case someone, something, is listening. These are not weaknesses. They are traditions. They are armor. The Jarl's warriors wear iron and fur. The Jarl wears habit. When trouble brews, when storms rise too early in the season, or 3 children fall ill in 1 week, he hosts a feast. Not to honor the gods, to contain fear, to bind the hall together, tightly, to remind every man and woman under his roof that he holds them and that they hold him. The laughter is louder on these nights, the drink poured faster, the stories longer, darker, more absurd. The skald sings of men swallowed by sea serpents, of trolls in the woods who steal cows and return them with their horns tied. The absurdity comforts. The exaggeration masks the truth, which is that everyone here is afraid, not of death, of what it leaves behind, a weakened hall, a disputed title, a child too young to inherit, a feast turned to blood. So they drink again, and laugh again, and speak of omens only when the fire has burned low and the voices around them have stilled. By now, most of the guests have drifted into slumber. Some lie where they sat, their heads resting on benches, mead horns still loosely clasped. Others stumble toward side rooms, furs clutched over their shoulders, boots left near the door. The skald has gone silent. The harp leans on its side. Embers crackle in the hearth, shedding faint orange light on bowls half filled with congealed stew. But the Jarl remains awake. He sits near the fire, his wife beside him, though neither speaks. Their thoughts are thick with silence, as if words might give shape to things best left unspoken. A servant moves softly between them, clearing trenchers, gathering bones into a bucket. Her eyes do not linger. She hears the quiet. She knows the tension. It is not fear of noise, it is the kind of silence that means something is being weighed. The Jarl stares into the flames. He remembers the old man who once ruled this hall. A stern face, a rough voice, He died coughing in his bed in a winter so cold the mead froze in its casks. Some say he was poisoned. Others said he simply gave up, tired of fighting the dark, and the dark never stops pressing in. The longhouse is sturdy, its beams thick, its doors barred at night, but outside in the trees are things older than any jarl. Spirits that live between snowflakes, that ride the wind, that enter when doors are left open too long. The old ways say fear keeps them away. A man who fears them honors them. A man who laughs at them draws them near. So the jarl fears, quietly, thoroughly, as he was taught. He fears illness, the kind that comes in the lungs, wet and fast, the kind that takes a strong man in a week and leaves his cloak to hang on the door for years untouched. He fears betrayal, not from enemies, but friends. The boy he raised, the cousin who drinks with him, the man who always volunteers for errands, who asks too little and listens too much. He fears prophecy. Once a Volva visited his hall, a seeress, wrinkled, cloaked in blue, her eyes white with age. She refused to eat until she was served from his own hand. Then she told him nothing, only this: there will be a winter with no thaw. He has not forgotten. His wife has not either. She tends the hearth not with firewood alone, but with memory. She remembers which families offered grain last harvest, which ones withheld. She knows who married whom, who had a child that sickened in the night, who came late to the last feast, who brought no gift. The jarl listens to her more than anyone, because while he commands warriors, she commands knowledge, and knowledge is the only thing that keeps fear from growing teeth. They do not speak now, but the shared silence is practiced. She glances toward the corner where the food is stored, toward the shutter that always rattles, toward the door where a draft creeps in, no matter how tightly it's barred. And the jarl thinks again of the gods, of Odin, who gave up his eye for wisdom and still did not find peace, of Thor, who battled beasts endlessly but could not stop the coming of Ragnarok, of Baldur, beautiful and beloved, killed by a sprig of mistletoe and a brother's trick. Even gods cannot outrun their fate. So what hope does a jarl have? He drinks again, not deeply, just enough. Enough to warm his belly. Enough to keep the thoughts from piling too high. The embers shift in the hearth. A log cracks, releasing a faint shower of sparks. Outside, a gust of wind howls low, and the shutters creak like old bones. One guard coughs near the door. Another mutters in his sleep. And the jarl, still seated upright, closes his eyes, not to rest, but to listen better. Fear does not always roar. Often it whispers. And tonight, in this long hall of carved beams and golden horns, fear is everywhere. Tamed, managed, hidden behind toasts and riddles, but always present, always waiting. And when the fire finally dies, it will still be there. Chapter 11. Gods of Ice and War. The wind that howled through the fjords was more than just air and ice. To the Vikings it was a whisper from the gods, an echo from another realm, carried through time and snow. In a world of constant hardship, divine meaning was found in every gust of wind, every crack of thunder, and every strange light dancing in the sky. The Norse people lived with their gods as a constant presence, not in temples of stone, but in every storm cloud, raven cry, and flicker of firelight. Imagine yourself in a smoky longhouse, the fire sputtering as snow sifts through the gaps in the wooden roof. A gray-bearded elder sits at the center, his voice barely louder than the wind outside. Children and adults alike huddle close, listening, not because the tale is new, but because the gods must always be remembered. He speaks slowly, eyes closed, calling forth images of Odin riding across the heavens on his 8-legged steed, of Thor's hammer crashing against giants, and of Loki's sly grin as he stirs trouble in the world of men. These stories were not just entertainment. They were maps for survival, warnings and teachings embedded in myth. They taught that life was a test, that suffering was not only inevitable but meaningful, and that the gods, though mighty, were themselves doomed. For what other religion tells its followers not just of creation, but of the inevitable end of all things? The Vikings believed in Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. It was not a distant doomsday tucked far away in time. It loomed close, always near. They believed that one day the sky would split, the sun would be devoured, and the earth would tremble beneath the weight of divine battle. Even gods would fall. This wasn't just a prophecy. It was a way of understanding the fragility of the world they lived in. The gods were reflections of Viking life itself. Odin, the one-eyed wanderer, endlessly seeking wisdom through sacrifice. Thor, the thunderer, protector of humans but easily enraged. Freya, goddess of fertility and battle, weeping tears of red gold. These were not distant, perfect beings. They were flawed, wounded, and ultimately mortal, just like those who worshipped them. Offerings to the gods were made with quiet solemnity. A carved wooden idol placed near a hearth, a sprinkle of mead over a stone. In times of great need, famine, plague, or looming war, sacrifices could be more grim. Animals often, and in darker corners of Viking history, perhaps even humans. The gods demanded much, and in return they gave little certainty. But they gave meaning. And that, in a life so uncertain, was everything. When lightning cracked over a field of dying crops, it wasn't just a storm. It was Thor expressing anger, or perhaps warning of something worse to come. When a raven perched on a roof beam and refused to leave, it was a message from Odin. Signs and omens were everywhere, if one had the patience and fear to interpret them. And then there were the creatures of myth. Jormungandr, the serpent so large he encircled the world. Fenrir, the monstrous wolf destined to slay Odin. These were more than stories. They explained the vast, uncontrollable forces the Vikings faced daily. The endless ocean, the biting cold, the unexplained deaths that visited even the strongest men. The Viking worldview was circular. There was no permanent peace, no eternal paradise for all. There was struggle, death, and honor in battle. The greatest aspiration, to die well. To fall with a weapon in hand so that one might be taken to Valhalla, the great hall of the slain. There, the chosen warriors would feast and fight until the end of days. And yet, even in that glorious afterlife, they waited only to die again, this time beside the gods themselves. But not all dead went to Valhalla. Some, especially women and those who died peacefully, might go to Folkvangr, Freya's field. Others to Helheim, the cold realm of the dead, ruled by the half-living goddess Hel. Unlike the Christian hell that would later enter Europe's imagination, this was not a place of fire but of silence and shadow. These beliefs were not organized into strict doctrines. There were no holy texts or centralized priesthood. Instead, the faith of the Vikings was woven into the rhythm of life, spoken by firelight, painted on ship prows, buried with the dead. It was fluid, communal, and above all, deeply personal. And through it all, there was fear. Not loud, dramatic fear, but a quiet, persistent tension. The fear that the gods might be displeased, that one's ancestors might be watching, that a mistake, even unintentional, could bring down a curse or disaster. As you listen to this now, as the snow still falls softly in your mind's eye, know that for a Viking, belief wasn't something they practiced. It was the atmosphere they lived in. Their sky, their sea, their fire, their gods were never far away. The elder in the longhouse finishes his story. No applause, just silence, broken by the soft crackle of flame. Outside, the wind shifts. Somewhere, a raven cries. The fire burns lower in the longhouse now, the logs reduced to glowing embers, shadows rising like spirits across the rough-hewn walls. The air smells of pine resin, smoke, and old wool. You are still among them, in thought, if not in body, listening to a world where gods bled and men prayed not for comfort, but for strength to endure the next storm. The Norse pantheon was never about kindness or justice. It was about resilience. In the sagas passed from voice to voice, the gods were rarely saviors. They were warriors, wanderers, weavers of fate. And the fate they wove? Always frayed at the edges. Among the gods, Odin stood highest, yet he did not rule by brute force. He ruled through cunning, sacrifice, and relentless pursuit of hidden truths. In one tale, he hangs himself on the world tree, Yggdrasil, pierced by his own spear, denying himself food and drink for 9 days and nights, just to glimpse the secrets of the runes. These weren't just letters to the Norse. The runes held magical power. To speak them was to name reality. To write them was to control fate. Even as the highest god, Odin feared what lay ahead. He knew his end was coming, could see it in dreams. But he kept walking forward, an image that quietly inspired the people who carved out their lives from frost and fire. Thor, son of Odin, was beloved more widely. His strength, his appetite, his roaring presence made him a comfort in a cold, uncertain world. Farmers buried hammers in their fields to bless the soil. Travelers whispered prayers for his protection on the road. He was not wise, but he was reliable. In a world where crops might fail and children might fall ill, reliability was more divine than mystery. Then came Loki, the shapeshifter, the trickster, the god who belonged and yet never quite fit. Some loved him, some feared him, none trusted him. He was chaos, change, and in some versions of the story, the father of monsters. To the Norse, Loki wasn't evil in a simple sense. He was necessary. He brought motion, conflict, even creativity. But when the final battle came, he would be there too, fighting against the gods with his monstrous children at his side. And it was not just gods the Vikings believed in, but a whole ecosystem of spiritual beings. Landvetir, the land spirits, lived in every field, every boulder, every forest glade. One did not build or plow without offering a gesture of respect. Even kings, before entering Iceland, had to leave their carved figureheads behind so they wouldn't scare off these unseen guardians. It was a world alive with meaning, layered with caution and reverence. There were Draugr, the undead, not like modern zombies, but vengeful spirits guarding their grave mounds. Warriors who refused to rest. They were said to possess superhuman strength, foul odors, and a hatred for the living. Stories of the Draugr were warnings. Honor the dead properly, or they may rise again. Dreams, too, were not merely dreams. A strange vision at night might be a message from the gods or a visit from a seer. Prophets, vulvas, often women, were deeply respected. Draped in cloaks, carrying staffs of bone or iron, they would sing ancient chants and speak of things to come. People came from distant farms to hear them speak, bearing gifts, braving snow. Even kings listened. But what good was prophecy when even the gods could not escape their doom? Ragnarok still hung over it all. It was not a distant punishment, not a fall from grace. It was baked into the world from the beginning. When the long winter came, the Fimbulwinter, with snow that never melted and wolves devouring the sun, then the end would begin. And they believed it would be terrifying and beautiful. Ships would sail through the skies, led by dead warriors. Fire would consume the earth. Great beasts would rise from the depths. The world would end, but from the ashes, a new one might begin. 2 humans would survive, hidden in the trunk of the world tree, and life would start again. It is perhaps comforting in its own way, a cyclical ending. No salvation, but renewal. No judgment, only inevitability. As you listen, perhaps you notice the stillness of your own room, the quiet hum of modern life, far removed from the creaking timbers and blowing snow of a Viking world. But somewhere, just in the corner of the imagination, the old gods still stir. Odin walking the wind, Thor cracking the sky, Freya watching with wise, weeping eyes, and the fire in that faraway longhouse glows just a little longer. Chapter 12. The Silent Wife. Women's Burden in Viking Life. In the sagas and stories passed through centuries, the Viking world is often painted with swords, sails, and storms. But there is a quieter rhythm beneath it all. A rhythm set not by warriors, but by women. Not in battlefields or longships, but in the low doorways of turf houses, the smoke-choked kitchens, the meadows scattered with grazing sheep. Their lives were no less vital. In fact, without them, the Viking world would have fallen apart before it ever began. Imagine waking before the first light touches the frosted window. The chill has settled into every corner of the home. Your breath clouds the air as you rise, wrapping wool tightly around your shoulders. There are embers in the hearth that must be coaxed back into flame, bread to knead, goats to milk, children to rouse from straw beds. And it begins. Another day, much like the last, stretching long and filled with motion. The Viking wife was no mere helper. She was the keeper of the home, the farm, the food, the cloth, and the fire. When the men were away, trading, raiding, or simply fishing far from shore, she became everything. A manager, a healer, a protector. And even when they were home, her work was constant and unrelenting. Weaving was one of her sacred duties. It wasn't just a chore, it was survival. Every sail that cut through ocean winds began with her hands. Every warm tunic, every funeral shroud. She spun the wool, dyed it with roots and moss, and wove it on looms taller than herself. The rhythmic thump of the loom was as vital as the hammer on the forge. She brewed the ale, churned the butter, dried the herbs, and salted the fish. She scraped hides, mended shoes, stitched wounds, told stories to restless children. Her domain was not the battlefield, but it required no less strength. The turf house she ran was dark and low. The roof, covered in thick grass, insulated against the cold but trapped the smoke. Without chimneys, the air remained heavy. Children coughed. Eyes stung. Still, the fire had to stay lit. It was life. And she kept it burning, through storm and silence. Marriage for a Viking woman was not purely a matter of affection. It was arrangement, alliance, and obligation. A dowry was paid, often in silver, livestock, or household goods. But, unlike in many other medieval societies, Viking women retained a degree of autonomy. They could own property. They could initiate divorce. They could reclaim their dowry if mistreated. A marriage was a partnership. Unequal, yes, but not invisible. In sagas, we catch glimpses of women both strong and wise. There's Un, the deep-minded, who led her clan across the sea to Iceland after her husband died. There's Gudrun Osvifsdottir, whose intelligence and cunning shape the entire course of the Laxdæla saga. These were not timid figures, but even so, their stories are rare. For every woman named, there are 1,000 more whose names were never written, whose voices drift like smoke in the longhouse. Motherhood was both sacred and sorrowful. Childbirth was dangerous. Many women died bringing new life into the world, and many children did not survive the first harsh winters. Still, they tried, again and again, in the hope that one child might grow strong enough to hold a sword, or carry on the fire of the home. The emotional weight borne by Viking women is hard to quantify. The waiting, the worrying, the constant, silent fear that a ship might never return, that a husband may fall in a raid, or a son be lost to sickness. And yet, she could not falter. The fields would not wait. The animals still needed tending. The fire still needed feeding. Some women carried the added burden of being thralls, slaves. Captured in war or bought in trade, their lives were even harder. They labored endlessly and had no say in their fate. Their stories are barely whispered in the records, but they were part of the Viking world too. And through it all, there was ritual. Rites for childbirth, for coming of age, for death. Women prepared the dead, washing bodies with care, wrapping them in woven shrouds. They knew herbs for healing and spells for protection. Some were vulvas, seeresses who stood outside ordinary roles, called upon to speak with spirits or see the unseen. But most were not mystics. Most were simply strong, quietly strong, the kind of strength that leaves no song behind, but without which no song could have ever been sung. The chores go on. Water boils, wool is spun. A cradle rocks near the fire, the baby swaddled tight. The wind howls at the door, but inside it is warm. For now, the cradle still sways gently in the dim light of the hearth. A worn hand pulls the wool blanket tighter around a sleeping child, while the other stirs a pot of gruel simmering quietly above the coals. The Viking wife does not rest. Even now, in the quietest hours of the day, she tends, watches, and works, unseen and uncelebrated, but absolutely essential. While the Viking man earned songs and sagas through feats of war and exploration, the woman's glory was unspoken. She maintained a realm just as harsh and demanding, one of hunger, illness, cold, and constant need. Her victories came in the form of survival. Another winter endured, another harvest stored, another child kept warm. Winter was her fiercest opponent. Food supplies had to last months. Dried fish, smoked lamb, fermented milk, all had to be carefully rationed. A miscalculation could mean starvation before the thaw. She had to know what remained in every barrel and what herbs might soothe a cough or dull a fever. She became, in her quiet way, a steward of life and death. And still her duties went beyond the home. Women joined in gathering peat for fuel, tending to livestock, planting and harvesting barley and flax. In coastal settlements, some even rowed out to help fish. The line between indoor and outdoor labor was never clear. Wherever there was need, she was expected to meet it. Yet there were brief moments carved out for community and kinship. At seasonal gatherings, blots, or thing meetings, women exchanged gossip, goods, and perhaps a few stolen moments of laughter. At weddings, they braided one another's hair with care. During funerals, they mourned together, voices low and raw, honoring the cycle they knew so well. There were also tales of women defending their homes. In times of attack or absence of men, some took up weapons, axes, knives, whatever was at hand. Archaeological finds hint that a few Viking women may have been buried with swords. Not proof of widespread female warriors, perhaps, but evidence that courage was not confined to gender. But more often, their battles were the kind that left no scars. The battle against despair, against endless repetition, against loneliness. The kind of daily grind that wears down the spirit like water on stone. In law, women had more rights than many of their European contemporaries. They could inherit property, could testify in court, could even demand divorce. If her husband struck her 3 times in public, she could leave and reclaim her dowry. But legal rights don't always protect from cultural expectations. A divorced woman might be mocked, a childless one pitied, a loud one scorned. Silence was often safer. Still, within the home, her word mattered. The keys to the house, literal iron keys often worn at the belt, symbolized her authority. She was, in many cases, the one who truly governed daily life, the keeper of supplies, the allocator of labor, the voice that guided the household when others faltered. The Old Norse language had a word, fru, meaning lady, derived from fru, mistress of the household. She may not have sat at the high seat, carved with beasts and myths, but she knew every stone of the hearth, every crack in the roof. Her power was quiet, but deeply rooted. And when death came, as it so often did, it was often women who prepared the body, who chose the grave goods, who dressed the corpse, who led the mourners in hushed remembrance. Life and death were both held in her hands. We may never know most of their names. Their voices have not survived in the sagas carved into memory. Their stories are stitched into the seams of unearthed tunics, pressed into the soot of cooking stones, and hinted at in the lines of surviving law codes and poems. But still, we imagine them. Stirring the pot, wrapping the child, waiting for a husband who might not return, watching the horizon for sales that never arrive, folding grief into work, folding strength into silence. Even in dreams, you might see her, not as a warrior or a queen, but as a woman standing at the doorway of a turf house, holding a bundle of wool in one arm and a baby in the other, her gaze steady, her breath misting in the morning air. And as the cold wind moves through the fjords once more, you understand. This was her world. This was her burden. This was her strength. Chapter 13. To Sleep with One Eye. Open. Night in the Viking World. Nightfall. In the Viking world was not a time of comfort. It came quickly, slipping over the land like a thick wool cloak, pressing into corners and crevices. There were no glowing street lamps, no quiet hum of electricity, only the dull orange flicker of hearthlight, the occasional sputter of a tallow candle, and the moonlight, when clouds did not hide it. Night brought not rest, but unease. The world grew quiet, but it was never still. Imagine a small turf longhouse huddled at the edge of a fjord. The sea whispers against the shore nearby, and the forest breathes just beyond the edge of the fields. Inside, the family prepares for bed. Children lie shoulder to shoulder on straw-stuffed mattresses. The air is heavy with the mingling of sweat, smoke, wool, and the lingering scent of dried fish. There are no bedrooms, no doors to close, just dark corners and shared warmth. Before sleep, routines are followed with care. The fire is banked carefully, embers smothered just enough to glow through the night, but not so much that they'll go out. The latch on the door is checked twice. The animals are gathered into a pen or tied to beams. Every task, every precaution is done not just from habit, but from quiet, generational fear. Because the night in Viking lands could be treacherous. There were the ordinary dangers, wild animals, wandering strangers, the cold. But there were also those born of belief. The dead did not always sleep peacefully. Ghosts, known as Afterganga, might rise from their mounds, angered by a slight or disturbed by improper burial rites. Their presence was feared not just for superstition's sake, but because stories claimed they could hurt the living, crush the chest of a sleeping man, or drive cattle mad with their passing. Wolves howled in the distance, their voices rising and falling like a song of the void. To the Vikings, wolves were more than animals, they were omens. Fenrir, the great wolf of prophecy, was always in the back of the mind, his eventual freedom foretold to signal the end of the world. Every howl could be a reminder of that ancient doom. There were also the Huldufolk, or hidden folk, beings who lived inside rocks and hills, watching unseen. They might cause mischief if offended. Milk spilled without explanation. A child waking with a fever. Tools misplaced though no one had touched them. These weren't dismissed as coincidences. They were interpreted as reminders to show respect, to leave offerings, to tread lightly in the unseen world. Inside the home, the atmosphere remained tense, even when still. Most slept fully clothed. The cold was too sharp to allow anything else. Blankets were furs or heavy wool, shared among bodies for warmth. There were few true beds. Most lay on raised wooden platforms or thick layers of straw. Snores and murmurs filled the room, a low chorus that sometimes paused when a log cracked in the fire or wind moaned too close. In those moments, eyes would open. Hands might reach slowly for a knife tucked beneath the bedding, not out of panic, but out of learned caution. The darkness held too many possibilities to risk trust. Some men took turns keeping watch, especially if the household was large or the night stormy. Others relied on dogs to bark at intruders or spirits, though it was said that dogs sometimes saw things their masters could not. A sudden growl, a whimper, a tail tucked low, these were taken seriously. Fear came not in shouts, but in silence. And yet not every night was one of terror. There were also quiet, almost sacred nights. Nights where the stars pierced the sky so clearly it felt like the gods themselves were watching. The northern lights shimmered above the snow-covered hills, dancing in green and blue ribbons. In such moments, the fear softened. People spoke more gently. Elders whispered tales of ancient ancestors. Children drifted to sleep listening to the rhythm of their mothers' voices. Those nights had their own magic. But always, sleep came slowly. It was not a surrender, but a guarded crossing. One entered sleep like a warrior crossing a misted field, hoping not to wake to a cry, a crash, or a shadow standing where none should be. For in the Viking world, the day demanded labor, but the night demanded vigilance. The hours of night passed slowly in the Viking world, measured not by clocks but by instinct. The shifting of embers in the hearth, the changing pitch of the wind, the way one's breath grew colder as dawn approached. Dreams, when they came, were not always kind. To dream of certain animals, of distant fires or falling stars might be taken as omens. To wake too suddenly could leave one shaken, unsure whether the rustle heard was memory, myth, or something far more real. In some households, charms were placed above the lintel or carved into beams. Simple patterns, sometimes a rune, meant to protect against spirits that roamed during the dark hours. Birch twigs, ash bark, or bone fragments from a favored ancestor might be tied near a child's bed. These weren't decorations. They were safeguards, part of the old ways, the silent pact with the unseen world. And for some, night was also a time for quiet labor. A woman might wake before the others, slipping from beneath the blanket to check on a sick child or to mend a torn garment by firelight. An old man might sit upright near the door, listening not for wolves, but for memory, letting the years pass through him like the wind. These were private hours, not wasted, not idle, just still. The sagas tell of wanderers, outcasts, and those cursed by fate who traveled at night, figures glimpsed by villagers from behind shutters, spoken of in hushed tones. Such travelers were thought to walk not only between places, but between worlds. If greeted kindly, they might share wisdom. If scorned or feared, they might bring misfortune. To sleep, then, was a risk. Still, it was a necessary one. The body required rest, even in fear. Sleep came in fragments, light, shallow, easily broken. Only the young and the truly weary slept deeply. Others drifted in and out, half listening to the house groan in the frost, to the muffled snort of livestock in the adjoining stall. Some believed that the soul could wander during sleep, that dreams were not just shadows of thought, but journeys. It was said that a person who woke with a start, unable to move, might have returned too quickly, the soul not yet fully seated back in the body. These beliefs were not dismissed, not debated. They were simply part of the fabric of the night. And there were the seasonal rhythms of darkness, too. In the depths of winter, night stretched long. The sun barely climbed above the horizon, and when it did, its light was thin and brief. In such months, the line between night and day blurred. People adjusted. Meals were eaten in half-light, chores done by lamplight. Conversations grew quieter. The dark pressed in, not just physically but emotionally. Spirits felt closer. Time felt slower. The weight of it all settled in the bones. But the Viking people endured. They did not wait for the dark to lift. They lived within it, made homes in it, raised children in it, prayed and wept and laughed in it. A child turns in sleep, murmurs a name half forgotten. A log collapses in the hearth, scattering sparks. The dog's ears twitch. Outside, the snow falls soundlessly, layer upon layer, softening the land. The night remains, watchful. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, light begins to return. Not brightly, not all at once. Just a grayness pressing back the black. A faint line at the edge of the sky. The moment where night begins to surrender, not with fanfare, but with quiet inevitability. Inside the longhouse, someone stirs. Perhaps it's the mother, rising to knead dough, or the father, reaching for his boots, or the old one, blinking toward the dawn. Sleep ends, but the watchfulness remains. For in the Viking world, day was for toil. But the memory of night lingered, a world of unseen things, soft sounds, and quiet fears that never fully left. And so, they lived, with one eye open, always. And so, the hearth grows cold, the sails lower, and the frost settles once more upon the land of the north. You've traveled across snow-dusted fields and silent longhouses, past the quiet strength of women, the watchful stillness of night, and the strange, solemn comfort of ancient gods. The world of the Vikings was never only raids and roaring fires. It was struggle and rhythm, endurance and waiting, shadows and silence. It was a place where survival was a sacred act. As we return from this journey, back to your quiet room, your still breath, your warm bed, allow the stories to drift like smoke into the background. Let the wind of the fjords fade. Let the longships vanish beyond the mist. There's no need to carry the weight of winter now. If you're still awake, we'd love to know. What part of this journey stayed with you the most? Was it the cold nights? The silent wives? The gods who knew their own end? Tell us in the comments below. Your thoughts help shape where we travel next. And if this slow journey through forgotten time helped you rest, drift, or simply pause from the rush of the day, consider subscribing to the channel. This is The Drowsy Historian, where sleep and history walk hand in hand.